Emma stepped into the gleaming showroom, her eyes fixed on a sleek luxury car. Dressed in a simple cardigan and worn-out sneakers, she barely got a glance from the sales staff. When she asked for a test drive, the salesman smirked. "Ma'am, this isn't a rental lot," he scoffed. A manager stepped in, crossing his arms. "We don't offer test drives to just anyone. Let's not waste time." Before she could respond, security was called. Moments later, Emma stood outside, humiliated, as the doors shut behind her. The workers laughed, having no idea who they had just thrown out. The glass doors of the high-end dealership slid open with a soft hush, and Emma stepped inside. The scent of polished leather and fresh car wax filled the air, mingling with the hum of quiet conversations. Towering glass windows showcased the gleaming luxury cars, their pristine surfaces reflecting the golden afternoon sun. Everything about the place exuded wealth, crystal chandeliers hanging overhead, espresso machines humming in the corner, and salesmen in tailored suits gliding across the floor like practiced performers in a well-rehearsed play. Emma stood still for a moment, taking it all in. Her fingers brushed the strap of her worn leather handbag, a simple brown tote she had carried for years. She wore a plain navy blue dress, neat but unremarkable, paired with comfortable flats. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, practical rather than stylish. She didn't need extravagance, never had. But today, she had come with a purpose. She stepped forward, her gaze settling on a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom parked in the center of the showroom. Its midnight paint gleamed under the showroom lights, the chrome accents catching and bending the reflections of the world around it. She smiled to herself, knowing how much her husband adored these cars. From across the room, a young salesman, no older than 30, narrowed his eyes at her. He was deep in conversation with a sharply dressed couple, an older man in a Rolex and a woman adorned in designer jewelry, but his gaze flicked toward Emma with a brief look of irritation. She wasn't their usual clientele. Her clothes, her demeanor. She looked like someone who had walked in by mistake. Still, he excused himself from the couple and made his way toward her, the fake politeness barely hiding his impatience. "Ma'am," he said, his voice coated with the kind of politeness reserved for those he didn't consider worth his time. "Are you lost?" Emma's brows lifted slightly. "No," she said. "I'm here to look at the Phantom." A flicker of amusement danced in the salesman's eyes before he quickly masked it with an indulgent smile. He glanced at her shoes, scuffed from years of wear, then at her handbag, as if calculating her worth. "The Phantom?" he echoed, as if she had made a mistake. Emma nodded, undeterred. "Yes, I'd like to take it for a test drive." A low chuckle escaped him. "Oh, ma'am," he said, shaking his head. "I don't think that's a good idea." Emma tilted her head. "Why not?" He let out an exaggerated sigh and folded his arms. "Well, for starters, this particular model starts at about $500,000. His tone was patient, condescending. "Not including the customization, of course." She gave him a flat look. "I'm aware of the price." The salesman's smirk didn't fade. Instead, he leaned in slightly, as if sharing a secret. "We usually require serious buyers to go through a pre-approval process before a test drive. You understand, don't you?" Emma's lips pressed together. "I'd still like to take it for a drive." He let out another chuckle, turning slightly to glance toward the other employees behind the front desk. A few of them were watching now, entertained by the exchange. One of them, a man in a dark blue suit, motioned toward the back office, shaking his head. The salesman hesitated, then turned back to Emma. "Let me get my manager," he said, still smirking. Emma watched as he strode off, shaking his head in amusement. She caught the way the other employees exchanged glances, barely bothering to hide their laughter. Minutes later, the manager arrived. A broad-shouldered man in his 40s with an expensive watch on his wrist and an air of authority that demanded attention. He approached Emma with an expression that was carefully neutral, but already edged with impatience. "I understand you're interested in a test drive," he said. Emma met his gaze. "That's right." He gave her the same once-over the salesman had. Then, in a voice dripping with forced politeness, he said, "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is not the kind of vehicle we allow just anyone to drive." A small silence stretched between them. Emma remained calm, her hands folded in front of her. "And what kind of person do you allow to drive it?" The manager didn't flinch, but his tone hardened. "Qualified buyers." Emma nodded slowly. "I see." He gave her an almost sympathetic look, as if trying to let her down easy. "Perhaps you'd be interested in something more in your budget." A few snickers from the employees behind the desk. One of them pretended to cough into his hand, barely hiding his laughter. A couple of customers nearby had taken notice, their eyes flicking between Emma and the staff. Some looked amused. Others simply watched, waiting to see how it would play out. Emma could feel the eyes on her, the silent judgment, the unspoken assumption that she didn't belong here. But she didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply exhaled softly and adjusted the strap of her handbag. "No need," she said. "I think I've seen enough." She turned toward the door, but the manager wasn't finished. He motioned to a security guard near the entrance, a burly man with a buzz cut. "Would you kindly escort this lady out?" Emma paused, glancing back. The security guard hesitated, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Sir, she's not causing any trouble." "I said escort her out," the manager snapped. Emma didn't wait. She stepped forward, walking toward the glass doors as whispers trailed behind her. She really thought she could test drive a Phantom. Probably just wanted pictures for her social media. What a waste of time. She stepped outside, the midday sun warming her face. Behind her, through the glass, she saw the workers laughing, shaking their heads. The young salesman who had approached her first stood near the front desk, grinning as he mimicked her posture for the others, exaggerating her calm demeanor. Emma didn't look back at them again. Instead, she took a slow breath and let the moment settle. And then, just for a second, she smiled. A small, knowing smirk. The kind of smile that hinted at something unseen, something waiting just around the corner. She turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing into the city streets, leaving the dealership workers with their laughter, completely unaware of the storm that was about to come. The sun was setting as Emma's car rolled through the towering iron gates of her estate. The long, winding driveway led past manicured gardens, trimmed hedges, and a pristine marble fountain that shimmered under the evening glow. The estate was vast, almost too vast for Emma's liking, but it was home. The main house stood like a monument to success, its grand windows reflecting the amber sky, its architecture a perfect blend of classic elegance and modern sophistication. As the car came to a gentle stop in front of the grand entrance, a butler in a crisp black suit stepped forward to open the door. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lancaster," he said with a respectful nod. Emma stepped out, still dressed in the same simple navy blue dress she had worn to the dealership. Despite the grandeur surrounding her, she carried herself with the same quiet grace she always had, no pretense, no unnecessary displays of wealth. She wasn't the type to flaunt what she had, and that was something she had always held close to her heart. Inside, the warmth of the estate embraced her. The high ceilings and polished marble floors exuded opulence, but the space still felt inviting. Paintings of renowned artists adorned the walls. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting soft golden light, and the scent of fresh lilies lingered in the air. She walked into the living room, where the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the vast gardens. A fire crackled gently in the marble fireplace, casting flickering shadows across the room. And there, seated on a leather armchair with a book in hand, was Jonathan Lancaster, her husband. Jonathan was a man who had built everything from the ground up. Though he was a billionaire now, his beginnings had been anything but easy. He had worked as a dishwasher at 16, juggled odd jobs through college, and made his first million through relentless effort and risk. His success had never made him arrogant. It had made him kinder. He never forgot where he came from, and he despised entitlement. The moment Emma stepped into the room, Jonathan looked up, his piercing blue eyes softening when he saw her. His rugged, handsome face, marked with the lines of experience rather than age, lit up. "Hey, love," he said, setting the book down. "You're home late." Emma offered him a small smile as she sat on the couch across from him. "I went to the dealership today." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "The Rolls-Royce dealership?" She nodded. His lips curled slightly in amusement. "And?" Emma leaned back against the couch, her expression calm, reflective. "They threw me out." The air in the room shifted. Jonathan straightened, his easy expression vanishing. "What?" She recounted the events of the day, the dismissive looks, the condescending tone, the outright refusal to let her test drive the car. She described how they had laughed at her, judged her for her appearance, and ultimately called security to escort her out. Jonathan's jaw clenched. His hands tightened into fists as he listened, his anger rising with every word. "They humiliated you?" Emma nodded, but there was no anger in her tone, just understanding. "They judged a book by its cover." Jonathan exhaled sharply, shaking his head in disbelief. "Do they have any idea who they just insulted?" His voice was laced with frustration. "Emma, this is ridiculous. I could call their owner right now." Emma held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I don't want that." Jonathan frowned. "You don't?" She shook her head, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "If you call their owner, they'll just apologize and move on. They'll forget about it in a week, but I want them to remember this." Jonathan leaned forward, intrigued. "What are you thinking?" Emma sipped her tea, a slow, knowing smile appearing on her lips. "I have a better idea." She didn't elaborate. She simply leaned back in her seat, her expression unreadable, but there was a glimmer in her eyes, one that Jonathan recognized all too well. It was the look she had when she was about to teach someone a lesson they wouldn't forget. Jonathan watched her for a moment, then pulled out his phone. "All right," he said, dialing a number. "I trust you." As he waited for the call to connect, he glanced at Emma again. She was still calm, still composed. The laughter from the dealership workers played in her mind, but it didn't affect her. If anything, it only made her more certain of what needed to be done. By tomorrow, they would understand. They would learn, and they would never judge a book by its cover again. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the sleek glass windows of the luxury car dealership, its pristine showroom already bustling with activity. Inside, the same employees who had ridiculed Emma the day before stood around the espresso machine, chatting smugly about their quick work of dismissing her. "That lady had some nerve," the young salesman Mark scoffed, stirring his coffee. "Did you see her face when we shut her down? Like she actually thought she could test drive a car worth more than her entire life." The others laughed, nodding in agreement. The manager, Mr. Carter, leaned against his desk, smirking. "I did her a favor. She would have embarrassed herself trying to even understand how to start the thing." A junior employee, Daniel, quiet and more reserved than the rest, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Unlike the others, he hadn't laughed or participated in yesterday's spectacle. He had watched it unfold with unease, his gut telling him that there was more to Emma than what met the eye. Before the conversation could continue, the deep purr of an engine outside the dealership silenced the room. It wasn't just any engine, it was the unmistakable sound of a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Heads turned. The sleek black vehicle rolled to a stop right at the entrance. The air changed. Employees straightened their ties, smoothing their hair, preparing to greet what they assumed was a high-profile billionaire client. "Gentlemen," Mr. Carter adjusted his cufflinks, his smug grin returning. "This is how you handle real customers." The chauffeur stepped out first, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit. He walked with practiced precision to the back passenger door, pausing only briefly before pulling it open with a professional flourish. Silence. Emma stepped out. She was dressed exactly the same as the day before. Simple clothes, modest handbag slung over her shoulder. And yet, the air of quiet confidence about her had never been more pronounced. The shift was immediate. The sneering salesman, the boastful manager, every single one of them stood frozen, their eyes widening in horror as realization dawned. The woman they had mocked, insulted, and humiliated just a day ago had arrived in one of the most expensive cars in the world. The tension thickened. Emma took her time, adjusting the strap of her bag, her expression unreadable as she calmly stepped forward. The men scrambled, their arrogance from moments ago dissolving into a mess of stammering apologies. Mr. Carter practically lunged forward, a sickly sweet smile plastered on his face. "Oh, welcome back, ma'am. What a pleasure to see you again." I'm terribly sorry about yesterday. There must have been some sort of misunderstanding." Mark, the salesman, nodded rapidly. "Yeah, we didn't recognize you. If we had known who you were, we—" Emma tilted her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. "You would have treated me differently?" They swallowed hard. The weight of their hypocrisy hung in the air like a storm cloud. She glanced around the showroom, her gaze landing briefly on the luxury car she had asked about the day before. The employees held their breath. Finally, Emma turned toward Daniel, the only employee who hadn't laughed, hadn't sneered, hadn't dismissed her. He stood slightly apart from the others, eyes wary yet respectful. A small smile touched Emma's lips. "You," she said, nodding toward him. "You'll handle my purchase." The room stood still. Mr. Carter's jaw nearly hit the floor. Mark looked like he wanted to protest, but the icy look in Emma's eyes stopped him. Daniel blinked, clearly shocked. Me?" Emma nodded. "Yes, you." Then, with deliberate grace, she stepped past the others and walked deeper into the showroom, leaving the stunned, humiliated employees in her wake. The power had shifted, and they would never forget it. Emma stepped forward, her presence commanding yet effortless. The air in the dealership had shifted. Gone was the smug confidence of the salesman who had mocked her the day before. Now they stood frozen, their faces drained of color, their polished exteriors cracking under the weight of their mistake. The chosen employee, a young man named Daniel, still processing what had just happened, swallowed hard as Emma turned to him. "Would you mind helping me with my purchase?" she asked, her voice as calm and composed as ever. Daniel blinked in shock before nodding rapidly. "Of course, ma'am. I'd be honored." The other employees, including the manager, stood helplessly in the background, no longer the gatekeepers of luxury, but mere spectators to their downfall. Emma walked past the rows of vehicles, her fingers grazing the sleek exteriors of high-end models. The entire showroom, once so unwelcoming, now felt eerily silent. The same men who had scoffed at her presence yesterday now held their breath, terrified of what she might say or do next. Daniel, eager but nervous, led her to the VIP lounge, offering her a comfortable seat. The irony was glaring. Just yesterday, they wouldn't even let her test drive a vehicle, and now she was being treated like royalty. Emma's eyes scanned the selection of cars. "I'll take the Rolls-Royce Phantom," she said. The manager, hearing this, tried to force himself back into the conversation. "Ma'am, I deeply apologize for yesterday. It was a misunderstanding. If I may personally—" Emma held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "No need," she said simply, her eyes never meeting his. She turned to Daniel instead. "Draw up the paperwork. I'll pay in cash." The dealership employees shifted uncomfortably, their mistake now costing them one of the biggest sales of their careers. The manager clenched his jaw. "If you'd allow me, ma'am, I'd be happy to throw in a premium service package." Emma ignored him, deliberately looking at Daniel. "Do you work on commission?" Daniel hesitated before nodding. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. You'll be handling this entire sale? I assume you'll be the one receiving the commission?" Daniel's eyes widened as the realization hit him. I suppose so, yes." "Then let's proceed." The other employees, especially the ones who had mocked her, exchanged frantic glances. The manager looked like he wanted to intervene, but what could he say? They had already dismissed her. As Daniel processed the paperwork, Emma glanced toward a janitor wiping the showroom floor. He was the only person who had treated her with decency when she first walked in, nodding in acknowledgement rather than sneering. Emma reached into her purse, pulled out a stack of crisp $100 bills, and walked over to him. "Thank you," she said simply, handing him the cash. The janitor, taken aback, hesitated before accepting it. "Ma'am, this is too much." Emma smiled. "No, it isn't. You treated me with kindness when you didn't have to. I appreciate that." The employees watched in stunned silence. Their greed had blinded them, yet it was the janitor, the one they barely noticed, who received Emma's gratitude. Emma turned toward the showroom exit, but just before stepping out, she glanced back at the room full of regretful faces. "You should treat everyone with respect," she said, her voice steady, deliberate. "Not all wealth wears a suit." With that, she stepped into her newly purchased Rolls-Royce Phantom, the engine purring as she pulled away. Inside the dealership, the weight of her words hung in the air like an anvil. The salesman, the manager, the smug employees, they all stood there watching as the woman they had humiliated drove off in the very luxury they had tried to keep from her. The story wouldn't end there. The lesson would ripple through their lives, haunting their future interactions. They had misjudged someone based on appearance alone, and in doing so, they had lost more than just a sale. They had lost their dignity. And Emma? She never looked back. She didn't need to. Justice had already been served. That evening, the golden glow of the setting sun bathed the sprawling estate in hues of amber and rose. The gentle rustling of leaves filled the air, and the distant sound of a fountain echoed softly through the open terrace. Emma sat in the garden, the very place where she often sought solace, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight from the table before her. Across from her, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, watching her with admiration and curiosity. "You were right," he said after a long pause, breaking the comfortable silence. "They humiliated you, and yet you didn't stoop to their level. You taught them a lesson without anger, without spite. That's rare." Emma let out a small, knowing smile, swirling the tea in her delicate porcelain cup. "It was never about revenge," she murmured. "I didn't want them to suffer. I wanted them to see, to truly understand." She set the cup down, her fingers tracing the rim thoughtfully. "People like that. They live in a world where money is the only currency of worth. They see no value in kindness, in humility, in respect. But today they learned that wealth isn't always worn on the outside." Jonathan exhaled, shaking his head as he leaned forward. "Still, I wouldn't have blamed you if you had embarrassed them more. After what they did?" His jaw tightened at the memory. Emma chuckled. "And then what?" "They would feel shame for a day, maybe two, and then go back to their old ways. No, Jonathan, real change doesn't come from shame. It comes from self-realization." Jonathan studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. "And do you think they realized?" Emma's gaze drifted beyond the terrace into the vast gardens illuminated by warm lantern light. She thought of the faces she had seen that morning, of the manager's nervous stammering, the salesman's desperate attempt to cover his tracks, the security guard shifting uncomfortably as he recalled his role in the scene. But most of all, she remembered the quiet gratitude in the eyes of the young employee who had been kind from the start. "Yes," she said, "I think they did." Back at the dealership, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Gone were the dismissive glances, the condescending smirks. Employees stood a little straighter, their greetings now carrying genuine warmth rather than forced politeness. A man in an old coat entered the showroom hesitantly, eyeing a row of cars. A few days ago, he would have been ignored, waved off without a second thought. Now, a salesman, one of the very same who had mocked Emma, stepped forward, his voice softer than before. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I assist you today?" The man hesitated, then smiled. "Just looking." "Take your time," the salesman said, offering a sincere nod before stepping back. The manager, watching from his office window, exhaled deeply. He had spent all day replaying yesterday's events in his mind, feeling the sharp sting of regret with every passing hour. He had let arrogance cloud his judgment. He had lost the biggest sale of his career, not just in money, but in dignity. Never again, he promised himself. As the cool evening breeze swept through the terrace, Emma opened her leather-bound journal, the pages worn from years of reflections. She dipped her pen into ink, pausing before she wrote. Today I learned that people don't change through punishment. They change when they see their own reflection in the mirror of consequence. She tapped the pen against the paper, then continued. Wealth fades. Power shifts. But dignity? That lasts. She closed the journal, setting it aside as she reached for her tea once more. She took a slow sip, savoring both the warmth of the drink and the warmth in her heart. Jonathan watched her for a moment before speaking. Do you think they'll remember? Emma's lips curled into a knowing smile. I think they'll never forget.